Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Big Ideas in Education. I am your host, Dr. Sarah Boulos, joined, of course, by my co-host, Ryan Kairalla. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Sarah. Great to be chatting with you.
I think I forgot to mention, because it's been a few weeks since we've done one of these of Somerset Academy Schools. I think I missed that part of the intro.
You're still working there, right? Nothing's changed.
Yeah, nothing changed this year. It's still early. It's only January, but yeah. Sarah Boulos of Somerset Academy Schools, and Ryan Kairalla, of course, of Doral College.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you all back. We're going to jump right in. Ryan, what do you want to talk about?
Well, speaking of colleges and Doral College, I got a higher ed story for you, Sarah. Let's pick up the thread on a conversation that I know you and I have had in the past in this program about test-optional college admissions. We had spoken with John Holler and Nate Crozier of the University of Miami. We did an interview with them where they talked about UM's shift to test-optional admissions, and that was more than a year ago.
Yeah.
And so this is a nice article that kind of follows up on this phenomenon and sees where things are now. And it's kind of a mixed picture. So with more colleges shifting to test-optional college admissions in the last couple of years, the hope among college administrators was that such a shift was going to lead to a more diverse student body and a higher percentage of low-income students on campus. However, as a recent article in Mindshift notes, the data does not appear to bear that out. The article notes that recent quantitative studies found that the test-optional movement on college campuses has not led to substantial increases in low-income students or students of color being enrolled. And in many cases, the removal of test scores as a requirement has made the decision-making process more difficult for admissions officers. Some are even concerned that the loss of test scores can lead to more heavily weighting other factors, such as the quality of an applicant's high school, which winds up favoring white and wealthy students even more. Further complicating matters is the fact that many applicants are not getting clear guidance as to just how optional a test-optional admissions process truly is. From the article, quote, "Many admissions officers said that they were struggling with how to select candidates fairly and didn't know how to weigh an application if they didn't submit a test score. Since college entrance exam scores could also be used for certain scholarships and determining course placements once admitted, it was difficult for admissions officers to say that the test wasn't still important." Now, Sarah, I don't envy 17, 18-year-old kids right now who are going into what is a pretty unprecedented time in college admissions. When we were going to school, the SAT, the ACT was a standard part of the college admissions experience, and how you did on those scores had a demonstrable impact on where you were going to get admitted and what kind of scholarships you were going to get. And now we're in this kind of more qualitative as opposed to quantitative world. Students are asking themselves, do I take these exams? If I take them, do I submit the scores? Are there some schools where I should really emphasize my scores, or some situations where the score doesn't matter as much? And the answer is the students don't know. And oftentimes, as the article indicates, the admissions officers don't know yet either.
Well, that was the scariest part, is that the admissions officers hadn't really delineated what the criteria was going to be, so when you decide to take something out, you have to talk about then what are you going to do? And that conversation about, weighted GPAs versus unweighted GPAs and the quality of the institution that a student is coming from, those should all be discussions that happened before you determined, okay, so we're going to remove this requirement, and what are we going to do instead, or how is it going to look? When you first mentioned that the data was not bearing out what they had anticipated, my first thought was, I wonder, because as a person who's worked with a lot of high schools, I wonder if low-income students are not getting more of this attention, because I know, as somebody who works with a lot of low-income high school students, we actually use something called test fee waivers for our low-income students to make sure they get the opportunity to take the SAT and ACT. And what that is that if your students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, if they are on, farm, what they are called farm throughout the country, right? Free and reduced meals. your students are eligible to have, I think it's up to 2 free SAT tests and 2 free ACT tests per year. And we really push that at the high school level. And I know guidance counselors spend a lot of energy pushing that for our low-income students to make sure that they're given opportunities that would level the playing field with other students who may not have trouble paying for an SAT test. And then I thought, if that's the case, how are these messages getting to the guidance counselors and to teachers and to the adults that are helping kids to make these determinations about where they're going to apply for school? And I'll be honest, I don't know that there's been such a great marketing campaign, for lack of a better term, getting this information down to the K-12 arena, into the public school space. Maybe it's been really well publicized in the same kinds of institutions that are already getting into those schools, right? Those really wealthy, elite, independent schools, private schools. Those kids already know about these changes because those counselors or those connections are there, or their family, maybe their legacy students, that's already there. So they know, which levers to pull. But I don't think, I hate to say that, I don't think that the message is getting to K-12, and I don't think that it's getting to lower income schools and to those students of color via the adults that are in their lives.
Well, it's hard because what message is supposed to be getting to these students?
Right.
Higher ed hasn't even decided what the message is yet in terms of what role these scores are supposed to play.
As a teacher in the state of Florida, I sympathize because this happens to us a lot. Decisions are made and then we're like, well, wait a minute, that means things and we don't know what it means. And the people who are supposed to know don't know yet. So unfortunately, I can sympathize.
And frankly, I'm really torn about where we kind of sit with this in terms of standardized testing. I'm generally no fan of standardized testing in terms of it being a particularly terrific measurement of a student's aptitude or intelligence or fitness for college. But I also don't envy the situation that admissions officers are in, where when you don't know a student, when they're on the other side of the country attending a high school you've never gone to, it's hard to get a better picture of a student's fitness for college just from transcripts that you can't verify, what a 3.5 at one school means versus a 3.5 at another school. Things like co-curricular activities can be so heavily biased towards students who are affluent. If you are affluent, you have access to, being able to go to Africa for a summer and do service work there or something like that, or being able to take piano lessons and guitar lessons and dance lessons. So I'm not saying that standardized test scores are great, but I think they do serve a purpose. And removing it from the equation, I think, can harm the sort of students that we're trying to help by switching to test optional policies.
I don't disagree with you. I'm also going to add that I think that I'm glad there's been a bit of reflection. I wonder if there's going to be reflection at every level, right? Not to just say, well, we tried it. It didn't do what we thought it was going to do. We give up. But maybe really reflecting on, did we think this through? Did we put the processes and systems into place that are going to make this successful? Clearly, by not delineating what rubrics or what determinations and what criteria that admission counselors are supposed to be using to make sure that they're equating one thing to another, they're not equipped to make these decisions. So that is a level of failure right there that needs to be determined and analyzed. How are we going to adjust before they just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, this is a bad policy?
So this is, switching to test optional admissions, as you're noting, isn't the end of the sentence, right? Like, that is the beginning of what needs to be a wholesale review of the way that we admit students into college. Absolutely. And, let's get all the policies and procedures under the hood, and whatever we decide, let's communicate clear expectations to the students so that, whatever level they're at, they know what they need to do to be able to present themselves effectively when applying to college. But again, I just don't envy. I mean, I was already in the position that I don't envy what high school students have to go through, because it's just so much harder now to get into an elite college than it was when we were in school, which wasn't that long ago. Don't, young people, it's so much more difficult and so much more competitive.
Nothing makes you sound
now.
younger than using the term young people.
Yes. I'm Steve Buscemi with the skateboard. How do you do, fellow
Absolutely.
kids? And so it's already tough out there for them. Yeah. And now this is just one other thing to make it more difficult to know, do I take the SAT? Whatever score I get, do I send it? Do I not? Does it matter? Does it not matter? And it's going to take higher ed some time to figure this out. And hopefully, as you noted, Sarah, they actually take the time to figure this out and they don't just sort of say, well, that didn't work. Back to the old system that we all agreed was pretty flawed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question. Be honest.
Okay.
When I say something like phonics or phonics instruction, what is the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, literacy, I would say.
Okay.
Reading, yeah.
Close your eyes.
Okay.
You are observing a phonics classroom. What do you see?
I'm observing a phonics classroom.
A phonics lesson. Maybe it's not a classroom.
I see. I'm looking at a teacher holding up two letters and they're a little this is the ch sound.
Right.
This is the sh sound. Yeah, it's all about stringing sounds together to help with
literacy. Who's learning? What do the students look like?
Small children,
small
kindergartners.
Children, right?
Yeah. That's what you were trying to get me at. I got there.
Whether you think of Hooked on Phonics commercials from the 90s,
and I do,
or Miss Rachel sounding out letters on TikTok or YouTube, chances are that you're thinking of very young children. But when does phonics instruction end? When should it end? For far too many of our students, it ends around first or second grade. Yet nationwide, 2 in 3 8th graders are not reading with proficiency, according to the National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP, as most of us know it, the rigorous exam overseen by the Department of Education, the United States Department of Education. Nearly 1 in 3 falls below basic, meaning they have not demonstrated even partial mastery of the comprehension and analysis skills expected for their age. And that issue is even more prevalent in Memphis, Tennessee, where leaders at the Memphis-Shelby County School District were seeing their students trail many other large school districts on that national exam. About half of their 8th graders were reading at below a basic level. So they decided to take action to correct this. The state passed a law that required all elementary school teachers be trained in a phonics-based approach with optional literacy training for middle and high school teachers. More than 40,000 teachers participated in the training so far, according to the state's education department. In Memphis, which faced enrollment declines during the pandemic, district leaders were applying lessons from the science of reading to high school students. That includes basic phonics for some who need it. But every student, including top performers, is learning to break down new vocabulary words part by part. At Oak Haven High School, students are applying these skills not just in language arts or reading classes, but in every class. At the start of each academic class at Oak Haven, students spend 15 minutes or so learning vocabulary and pulling words apart, using what we call morphology, right? Using prefixes, suffixes, word parts. Yeah. In biology, for example, students wrote down the definition of prophase, the first stage of cell division, and identified the prefix pro, meaning forward, before diving into the material. Officials in Memphis are hoping that their literacy focus and other investments like tutoring are paying off. Recently, the district received the state's highest rating for academic growth for the first time in 7 years. So there's definitely something to be said about prolonging phonics instruction far past what we generally do.
Well, that's interesting. And what I also gathered from that story is not just an endorsement of extending phonics instruction further into a student's academic career, but I also heard kind of a tacit endorsement for reading and literacy across the curriculum, right? Having elementary teachers, regardless of discipline, learning these basic phonics skills to make sure that we understand that teaching reading is not just something limited to ELA classes.
And you mentioned elementary students, but I can tell you, as somebody who's worked in a lot of high schools with a lot of high school teachers, the harder sell is that lesson as the students get older, because the kind of teachers we have in middle and high school grades are not reading teachers. They are not, right? A lot of times we're talking about high school chemistry teachers who were chemists, right? You might have somebody who worked for, a pharmaceutical company who wants to change careers and becomes a high school chemistry teacher. That person has never been taught how to teach reading. Yeah. Never been taught how to teach phonics. And so what does that look like when we get into the older phonics instruction space, and how does that work?
But I mean, yeah, I could see that being a transition for a lot of the, middle and high school educators, particularly the ones that you talked about that, transition from a different career, maybe didn't go through a traditional school of education where they would have been exposed to this instruction almost inherently. But it's so valuable. And I love the idea of the value that this has in the sciences, right? Learning those prefixes and using those prefixes, which are so important to phonics, exposes students to a lot of concepts and helps them understand in chemistry and things like that. Understand, those prefixes, those suffixes, those word sounds convey a lot of understanding of subject matter in those subjects. So we're teaching the subject matter, but we're also further bolstering literacy and reading instruction by emphasizing phonics. There's a lot to like about this. And I'm hoping that Tennessee can continue this work and continue to kind of spread this gospel and get those teachers on board with it.
And in addition to that, I think what's important is that they are investing so much time in training the teachers how to do this, right? Like that is a really critical component here, because I'm going to throw another wrench at you. In addition to, possible career changers who may or may not have had this kind of training to provide this instruction, what's something that we've talked about on this show a lot that's been going on for the past 20, 30 years when we talk about like the reading wars or balanced literacy, has been this whole conversation about whether or not phonics instruction should even happen and to what extent it should happen.
Oh, that phonics versus whole language kind of debate.
Correct. Yeah. So if that's been the case for the past 30 years, think about the incoming teaching force and how many of our teachers, maybe even elementary teachers, not only haven't been taught how to teach phonics, but were never taught phonics in the first place.
Or they've taught it, but have like a doctrinal aversion to it. They don't believe in that as a,
and maybe did not experience
reading.
It, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of barriers here that I think we need to talk about. If this is something which most schools that I've worked with have this as a philosophy, if not in practice. So how do we get this from, we know this is what we should be doing, to making sure it's happening in every classroom? It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment in making sure that this is happening in a really strategic way.
It takes a lot of investment, but as you noted in your story, there's a big pot of gold awaiting there. Like
absolutely,
the scores went way up. Tennessee, as you indicated, had considerable growth. So there's a lot of reward if you're willing to put in the investment, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Well, we would love to hear what your thoughts on these subjects. Whether it's college admissions or whether it's phonics instruction, I'd love to know. You can reach out to us using the hashtag BigIdeasInEducation or at Academica Media. We loved having you. And Ryan, thanks for being here. Have a great week.
See you next week, everybody.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.